everyone. Thanks for joining today. Welcome back to this month's Apex monthly webinar. My name is Catherine Kirkhoff. I am the Director of Kinetiq Health here at Apex. And today's topic is financial triage. And we are here with a special guest host. This is Kristen Ahlenius, Director of Education at Your Moneyline. Your Moneyline has become a really trusted vendor and partner for a lot of our Apex clients, but also Apex employees. So like I said, today we're talking about financial triage. Kind of talk to us about that concept of triage. When you gave me that word, for a team, Kinetiq Health has a lot of healthcare providers, a lot of healthcare experts. So triage makes sense in the healthcare, discussion. But when it comes to finance, talk to us about that concept, because I know it can feel really overwhelming for people.
Yeah, I'm a metaphor person, so I try really hard to, when there's something that I understand that I'm not sure that others might understand just because of the nature of my work, I want to draw a parallel for them. And so I thought, what's something, I wanted to talk about the next dollar as a concept. I'm like, well, no one knows what that means. Okay, so what's a concept that people understand? Well, we all generally understand triage in a medical sense. Like if you and I both go to the emergency room and, knock on wood, if you needed a couple stitches, but I need an emergency appendectomy, well, I'm going to be attended to first because my situation is more dire. It could potentially be life-threatening, and hopefully, your stitches are not. And so we don't generally think about it that way, but we're almost always playing triage with our dollars. Right. It's just that we don't usually take a step back and think about it like we do from a medical perspective. And that's really what our personal financial health is it's a game of financial triage.
Right, that makes perfect sense. Well, like I said today, if you have any questions or anything, please go ahead and put those in the chat box. We do have someone monitoring those. We will hopefully try to get to them at the end of the presentation, but if not, you can email me, which my contact information will be up, and I will be able to forward those to Kristen. So now that we know kind of what the triage theme is, why we're talking about today, how does that translate in today's world, and how can we make that more about our personal finance?
Yeah, so I really wanted to bring this to, sorry, it didn't. That's my fault. Bear with us here. So it's our financial life because we have a finite amount of resources. So just like that emergency room doctor has a finite amount of time, they can only spend that 1 minute with that one patient. So they have to decide how that minute's best spent. That's really what we're doing with our money, is where is our dollar best spent? And for us, for you and me, someone watching this session, it could all be different, right? Yeah. Your top priority could be different than mine, and that's okay. I think the thing that we need to come back to is that every dollar that we make can only be spent one time. And it can either be spent on, again, we don't think that way in the moment, but it can either be spent on your past, it can be spent on your future, or it can be spent on your present. So a past example would be, maybe you have like a pesky credit card payment that you just can't get rid of it. So it's a past goal. Well, if you put $1 toward that credit card payment, then well, it went to your past and it's done. If you have a future goal, maybe you are saving in a 529 for a child, or maybe you're saving for your own retirement. That dollar goes into the account and it's done. Or maybe it's a today goal, like maybe you got a coffee on your way here, or maybe to watch the session you ordered Uber Eats or DoorDash or something. That's a today goal. And we just have to achieve that balance between, okay, that dollar can only be spent one time. Do I want to spend it past? Do I want to spend it on the future? Or do I want to spend it on the present?
Okay, but that concept can sometimes go too far eventually, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's a very, very, very slippery slope. So I would say that this is where, and I empathize, right? Because I think there are a lot of arguments in this space that I'm as a millennial, for a long time it felt like everyone kept telling me that you can't afford to buy a house because of your avocado toast, right? That was like the argument. It was like, okay, if millennials would buy less avocado toast, they could afford to retire. Or there was a politician a few years ago who said, well, we can save Social Security if every American gives up their daily latte. And it's like, is everybody having a latte every day, you know, right? And it's not about depriving us of those little joys, but I also get it, because if I asked you to take a step back and say, I am going to look very, very hard at every single dollar I spent, before you know it, you're thinking, Kristen, like, every dollar would be better saved than spent. And I don't want people to feel that way, because then before you know it, you're on your way home and you're gonna get a McChicken and a Diet Coke from McDonald's, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, if I don't spend this $2.14 today, it'll be worth $23 in retirement, and you've deprived yourself of a $2 joy. That's not what I want anybody to take away from this.
Okay. So is there a certain percentage when it comes to savings? Like, I know each person's gonna be personal.
Yeah.
So, you get your paycheck, you have some that goes towards your health benefits, your insurance, your dental, your vision, your 401k, hopefully you're saving, Is there a certain percentage of that left over that we should try, would you say?
Yes, there are some rules of thumb. And so I love to say, and you'll probably hear me say it like 3 times during this presentation, that personal finance is just that, it's personal.
Okay.
So if, what works for me might not work for you. Maybe you started saving really aggressively out of the gate, you graduated college and you were putting, as much as you could into your 401k, and because you super funded that goal, now you can kind of take a little bit of a step back. Or maybe the inverse is true. Maybe you were really strapped for cash, you weren't contributing as much as you wanted to, and now you feel like you're playing catch up. I mean, in the retirement space specifically, Vanguard, Fidelity, Russell Investments, lots of big names in this space, their collective research really supports that we should be saving 12 to as much as 15% for retirement. So when that's a big piece, right, of our monthly budget, retirement eats up a pretty big chunk of that. And then beyond that, I like to say, I would love to see you save maybe 10% of your take-home pay for whether it's short or intermediate term goals, just because breaking dependence on your income is really the long-term goal, is to like, I don't need it. I have passive income or I have retirement assets.
Okay, that makes sense. So you talked about this idea of the next dollar.
Mm-hmm.
I ran through this outline and I thought, what is the next dollar? What is this concept?
Yeah, so that's why I wanted to start with the metaphor, because most people aren't super familiar. So if you have an extra dollar, meaning a dollar that you're not generally relying on. So in a perfect scenario, this is you're a salaried employee and you get a quarterly bonus. Well, you weren't sure if you were going to get that bonus, but you just did, and it's not money that you're relying on every month. Okay, so what do I do with that next dollar of income? And my goal for you, we're in the slew of tax refund season. Before that money hits your pocket and it's burning a hole in it, let's know where it's going to go in advance. This is also true on the month to month as well. So if you have, let's say, just for math's sake, let's say you make $5,000 a month and you only need $4,500. Well, the next dollar in that example is that $4,501st dollar. Where does that dollar I'm not relying on go? And that's the concept of the next dollar.
Okay. Do you have like a general rule for that next dollar?
Yes. And here we go again.
Yeah.
I'm a metaphor girl, and I'm going to tell you 100 times that personal finance is personal, but this is, if we were like bowling, this is really like your bumpers to keep you on the lane. So if you're someone who's like reading this slide already and you're thinking this is not going to work for me, it might not. Personal finance is that. This is to give you, a dart on the board to kind of give you some structure if you're not sure where to start. So if I'm going through this and you're thinking you might need to reorder some of these priorities, if you're a participant here, that's perfectly okay. It's not for me to say. This is just to give you some guidance. But the first thing is an emergency fund. And the field that I work in financial wellness, we, personal finance in general, we love to just be like, save 3 to 6 months for an emergency.
That's why I giggled, because when does that happen?
Exactly. We love to just throw that out. We're so blasé about it as a whole. And we're just like, save 3 to 6 months of your expenses. Well, if you recall, I just told you that I would like for you to save 10% of your income. Well, if you're living off of all that income, it's going to take you like 3 years to save 3 months of expenses. And I'm just like, just save 3 to 6 months.
Aside, it's no big deal.
It's no big deal.
Yeah.
So I like to give people, first of all, I'll talk about that range, but we have to have some sort of foundation for that emergency fund. If this is where you're starting, if you're a homeowner or you own your own car, I would like for that initial threshold to be $1,000, because it just seems like car emergencies or house emergencies, you can hardly get out of them without them being, I mean, if your hot water heater goes out, by the time you buy a new one and get it installed, you're probably looking at $1,000.
Sure.
So if you rent and maybe you don't have your own vehicle or you use public transportation, maybe 500 would be where I would start. That's kind of the first place that I want you to look, is the start of that emergency fund, not this like save 6 months, you know, kind of deal.
Yeah.
The second would be like high interest rate debt. And I don't mean like a reasonable house payment. I don't mean objectively affordable car payment. It's like if you have a credit card or a personal loan, or maybe you've fallen into the trap of like payday lending. There's no shame in any of that. That's the other thing too, is I'm a firm believer in not shaming the beginning of someone's journey. Okay, that has happened. Let's figure out how to be better for tomorrow's you.
Yeah.
And so if you have high interest rate debt, I need you to get out from under that, because it's so hard to move your financial health forward when you're paying double-digit interest to someone else.
Okay. And that's something specifically too that your Moneyline can really help with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, finding those resources to help guide you through getting out of that high interest debt,
Mm-hmm.
which a lot of Americans fall into.
Oh, the average credit card balance now is like $5,300. So it's like, if you're watching this and if you're feeling a little bit of shame about, oh my God, that's me. Like I have credit card debt. You're not alone. The average American has $5,300 in credit card debt right now.
With interest rates of like 20%.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead.
Nope. Go on.
The next is retirement. So you talked about those like saving, like benchmarks, if you will. The next thing is I need you to be coming back to retirement at least to your employer's match. So it's pretty common to get like a 3% dollar to dollar match. We have to be capturing that money if we can objectively afford it. It can't come at the expense of paying off a payday lender or a crazy high interest rate, but as soon as that money is in your budget, we have to come back to retirement. We have to be, future you deserves it, and you need to put in that work for future you to save for retirement.
Okay. Okay, so you talked about, the water heater. In my case, last year it was the furnace and AC at the same time.
Oh.
So when we have those unexpected expenses, because that was the first thing my husband and I did, is like, okay, what are we pulling from here? What do we need to do to cover this? What do we do? What if we have those unexpected expenses?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it really is circumstantial. So the first thing is once you get on this like financial wellness journey and you're saving more and you're saving more and you're saving more, it almost feels like you don't have permission to like break that glass.
Right.
To say like, well, I've tried so hard to save it. An emergency fund is never going to be this like straight line trajectory from like your 0 to your 6-month goal. It's just not, because that's not how life is, right? Like there are so many financial emergencies. So ideally you look to your emergency fund first, and you've done some work on that, and you give yourself permission to do that. So like I said, that hot water heater example, I would say, okay, hey, if you have that $1,000 saved, give yourself permission to put it there. It's going to feel awful to give that money that you've worked so hard to save. But then let's take a step back and think about, wait a minute, if I wouldn't have had this saved, it may have gone on a credit card.
Right.
Or I may have taken a line of credit against the house, or you could have potentially jeopardized your future stability in order to pay for that expense. So give yourself permission to do that.
And then you start to try to build back that emergency fund.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That's why that journey is never going to be
right.
never going to be linear, unfortunately.
And then you have your intermediate goals though, that you, like for instance, we saved for a year for Disney. So those little things. Right.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's and that's where the fun is, right? So like once we get, I really do want you to fully fund your emergency fund before intermediate goals, if I was being really picky.
Okay.
But in that full emergency fund, we come right back to this like 3 to 6. Well, like that's a huge difference. That's a huge difference. If you need, let's say you need $5,000 to run your household, we're talking about a $15,000 gap in what I just told you need to save.
Yeah.
Do you need to save 15 grand or do you need to save 30 grand? That's huge.
Yeah.
And so for me, it comes down to what type of household you have. And I'll use myself as the example. I'm a single income household. It's just little old me. There's pros and cons to that, right? Like nobody relies on me for anything financially. I'm only in charge of myself. But if I were to lose my income, there's no safety net there of a secondary income source. And I have just 24 hours in a day to go out and find new employment.
Right.
Someone like me probably needs more like 6 months of emergency savings because there isn't that, like, again, partner or secondary income source. The inverse of that is if you're a dual income household, if one person loses their income, you still have some base level of income while the other person goes to look for work. You're not losing 100% of that income. So I would say if you're a dual income house, or if you're a 2 or more person house, but more than just one person is capable of finding gainful employment, I would say 3 months is probably sufficient.
Okay.
And then single income households, you know, it's just part of who we are, probably closer to that 6 month range.
Okay.
But yeah, and then we get to those intermediate goals, which is the fun stuff. That's what everybody wants
Right.
to save for. Everybody wants to save for Disney, or, you know, the next car that they want to buy, or that's where we really get to have a lot of fun and just say, like, where do I want my money to go?
Yeah, and that might fluctuate.
100%.
Like,
And what's
right.
important to you is not gonna be what's important to me, right?
Right.
I might be saving for something that you think is totally frivolous and ridiculous,
Mhm.
and vice versa, and that's okay. That's the whole point of all of this, is to just work on your financial health.
And that might be more something, like, for instance, with a tax return, or like a quarterly bonus or something.
Yeah.
Well, you know what, I'm gonna take the majority of this and put it towards those intermediate goals.
Exactly. That's
So
exactly.
it's not burning a hole in our pocket.
There it is.
Okay.
So you don't go out and spend it. It might be something that's on your goals list. Like, maybe you were like, well, you know, we depleted the emergency fund putting a new furnace in or whatever. And really that would be our top goal. But this money is really burning a hole in the pocket and we want to go to Disney. Okay, well, let's just have a check-in. What really is our top financial priority right now with this money? Because we need to pivot constantly when it comes
Right.
to our financial health. It's not a set it and forget it thing, unfortunately.
Right. So ultimately, how do we accomplish this? How do we accomplish hitting these intermediate goals, you know, funding our emergency fund? How do we get to that point?
Yeah, we first have to start with the non-negotiable, which for me is, I can't have you looking down my hierarchy and saying, I need to capture my employer match if you are not able to meet your monthly expenses. If you feel like you're putting things, or you know that you're putting things on credit because you're contributing double digits to your retirement account, I can't have that. I have to have you making your payments on time. And the second thing is that I can't, you have to be putting on the inverse of that, is that you have to be putting something toward retirement as soon as you can objectively afford it. If you can't put your employer match, that's okay. But there is, again, I'm calling out my own industry here. It's so common for us to be like, yeah, just put money in retirement. Well, if you're someone who's never put money in an account that's not designated to be touched until you're basically 60 years old, there's emotional weight there. There's emotional weight with parting with your hard-earned income that then you can't touch. So as soon as you can, even if it's not to the match, even if it's $25 a paycheck, I don't really care what the amount is, get used to that emotional barrier of parting with that money for the intermediate or the long term.
Okay.
Well, we kind of talked about unexpected expenses. You brought up the hot water heater example. Another example that is really common with our audience is like if you have like kids, and then someone that I work with, this recently happened to them, both of their children needed braces at the same ortho appointment. It's like, what? Like, yeah. Who has the money saved for both of their kids to go to the orthodontist, right? Like, very few of us. So like in examples like that, give yourself permission to look at, you know, does the orthodontist have a payment plan? Can we use a payment plan at the orthodontist office? It's okay to do those things. Or if it depletes, you know, it's really all kind of a wash, because if it would deplete your emergency savings and you're replenishing the emergency savings, is that really different than paying the orthodontist? It's about what makes you feel comfortable.
Okay, that makes sense.
But none of it happens really without financial goals. And that's really kind of the point of all of this, is like, you have to know what's important to you. So if you have, treat your financial goals like you're the emergency room doctor and they're like all of your patients. If you want to fully fund your emergency, they're out in the waiting room, and you want to fully fund your emergency fund, and you want to go to Disney, and you want to buy another house in 3 years, and be super exhaustive. Rank all of your financial goals like 1 through 10. If you say, I cannot go to sleep another night without putting more money in my emergency fund, that's a 1. If it's something that's like giving you financial anxiety, that's a 1. And then we work all the way down to 10 and say, well, this is something I'd like to do, but if the money's not there, I'm not gonna be heartbroken about it. And then you just fund your goals as you have the discretionary income. And the thing that I would encourage you to take away from that is like, unless you're a part of the 1%, you know, all of us watching this session by and large, we're gonna run out of money eventually. I can't accomplish every single thing that I want to in my financial life, and that's okay.
Right. And so ultimately, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
But I just want to make sure that, you know, people who are watching today know like how they can use your MoneyLine services.
Yeah.
So we know that Apex knows that this is something we can promote to our, you know, our clients. A lot of people don't consider the fact that financial wellness can be such a burden. Like you said, lying awake at night with anxiety,
100%.
it all takes a toll on us. Mental health,
Mhm.
and like you say, financials are constant. They're never going to go away. They're constantly going to be a burden or not a burden, depending on how we look at it or how we're able to save. So a lot of times this is something that the Kinetiq Health team likes to bring to clients if it's something their employees are asking for, but if your company doesn't offer your MoneyLine as an extra benefit, is this something someone could reach out to your MoneyLine for to get more guidance?
So your MoneyLine by nature is a business-to-business offering. So you would want to talk to, if you're working with a company that does not have access, you would want to work with your HR professional to say, how can we add this to our wellness offering? How can this be a pillar of wellness for us?
Okay, that's great. Because it is something I think important that it does, you know, kind of play that role on mental health, which plays a role in physical health. It's all this big circle.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and the data supports that. New data suggests that the financially stressed employee costs an organization or costs the healthcare system collectively an extra $413-ish a year due to the financial stress and then that physical weight that's accompanied.
Yeah. So Josh, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions in the chat. The first is, how do you approach payment plans with hospitals and doctors' offices? I didn't know there were flexible options with those bills.
That's hard because in my experience, right, and I'm just one woman, right?
Yeah.
But in my experience, it's kind of dependent. Like I've had people who called me and said, hey, I called and I negotiated a lower payment and I was super successful. And then I've had other people call and say they would not budge. They said, this is what was due on this day at this time. So I always tell people, like, what's the worst thing they're gonna say? And another variation of that question that I get a lot in my work is, I feel like I can't afford my credit card payment because the interest is so high. It's just eating up all the money I'm putting in there. So it's like, okay, well, call and ask if they'll lower your rate for 3 months. Like, what's the worst thing they're gonna say is no, and you never know. And we actually see a fair amount of success with that. So my advice, and that question can be framed in so many ways. My advice is just ask.
Right. And medical bill payments are interest-free, correct?
Well, usually they set you on a zero interest payment plan, yeah, because it's usually to that provider. It's not like they've like sold, like your credit card is like, well, Discover owns that, right? So it's like, it's still in-house, so a lot of time they'll set you up on like a 0% payment plan.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
On the topic of credit cards, what is a good credit score to help guarantee low interest on merchant type credit cards?
Also varies, right? There's always an and or a but with me. Like I'm always like, well, you know, it could be, because I would say once you get into that 700 range, you really can take kind of a breath. I don't like to put a lot of weight on credit scores, but I also am not naive enough to think that you have to care about your credit score, unfortunately, in the world we live in. I wish that wasn't true. And I would say once you get into that 700 range, that's when you can really like take a step back. Up into like the 740 and beyond, we rarely see much difference from lenders or creditors when it comes to those interest rates.
Okay.
So, you know, like I said, above 700, and certainly once you get into the upper 700s, there's rarely any benefit to pursuing or continuing to pursue that increased score.
One more in the chat is, do you suggest putting your emergency funds into higher rate products like CDs, Marcus accounts, etc.?
Yeah, I love that. That's a two-parter actually. So there's dual benefit to that. So I am a huge advocate, huge. Again, I'm just one woman. but I'm a huge advocate of putting your emergency savings account somewhere that's not easily accessible to you.
Okay.
So like we.
Otherwise, it's just looking at you.
Yeah, it's just right there. Like, would it really be a big deal if I transferred this money back out? Like,
that's so true.
so it's so true. And I don't know if you've ever read Atomic Habits by James Clear, but the whole premise of his book is that, in a nutshell, sorry, spoiler, but the book's been out for like 10 years, I think. So, but the whole premise of the book really is like, we will do things that aren't hard for us to accomplish. And if we want to prevent ourselves from doing something, we just need to like put a barrier. So for me in my emergency savings account, that's keeping it at the same company that that holds our 401k. And I keep it in a high yield account with them for that very reason. It's not looking at me every day. And I find in my anecdotal experience, that helps people so much to just have that second barrier. It takes me 3 business days to get money out of there. So if I really need it, I can have it, but it's pretty inconvenient for me to get to it.
Okay. So that's just as easy as literally going to possibly a different bank or credit union or your 401, like, just need to open up an account.
Yep.
That's where you put your money.
100%. And then don't link it to like your Venmo or your Cash App or whatever. Because then it's the click of a button, it's right there. And most of those transfers you can pay to have them be instant. But like the partner bank the company I use, for example, and a lot of online platforms use partner banks. So your money could be in several different places. So it takes them 3 days to get it to you. And in my experience, it's usually good for our financial health to do it that way.
Okay, that makes sense.
The last question that I'm seeing is that someone signed in late, and can we send them the recording? I'm assuming if they just email you their email address.
Yes. Yep, and then all of our webinars are actually on the Apex YouTube channel. So once this is recorded, it should be up there, but please feel free to email me right there at Kirkhoff, and I can make sure to get this to you.
I think that's all the questions in the chat.
Honestly, that's perfect because we only have a few more minutes.
Excellent.
So thanks so much for having us. I really appreciate it, Kristen. Like I said, any other questions, like anything maybe more personal you'd like to reach out to, please feel free to email me and I will make sure Kristen gets these. So thanks so much for joining us. We will have our monthly webinar in April, will be hosted by our social worker, Andrea, and our registered dietitian, Tyler. We'll be talking about body positivity and neutrality. So please join next month.